Welcome again to the Identity Manager version 7 bits. In this specific video I want to show you the pretty new feature Identity Manager Application Server. As you know, the application server, it's a very nice way to connect to the database using a 3-tier architecture. Please have fun watching that video. Let's talk a bit about multi-tier architecture, and I think the most known architecture type here is the 3-tier architecture, and we implemented that in Identity Manager 7. Remember please the past. In Identity Manager 6 we always have had services or admin front ends or something like that installed on a specific machine, and the presentation tier and the application tier was just on the same machine. That means the forms and the front end you was using to show something together with the engine that was connected to the database was part of the same machine. From a security perspective, this is sometimes not that good than it should be, especially because you are able, if that happens, to manipulate, if you want to, for example, the application tier, and with that to endanger your application. The only front end in Identity Manager 6 that was able to work in a 3-tier architecture was our web portal, because in the web portal the application was on the web server, the front end on the client machine, and the data tier, the data store, on the database server. In an environment where all of these machines were separated, the 3-tier architecture was completely implemented. In version 7, we have now the chance to do the same for every other front ends and server services as well. Because in version 7 first time exists something we call an application server, and this application server represents the application tier. It could be connected from the presentation tier. A presentation tier could be the web server, a server service, admin front end, whatever, installed on other machines, and separated from the application server as well. It's the data tier, which is our database, installed on another machine. With that, we have an absolutely classic 3-tier architecture and are able to separate all of these different tiers. A number of people now like to tell you that 3 architecture is the only architecture that makes sense and have to be used from a principle in every installation. From my personal perspective, this is absolutely nonsense. The reason for that is the 3-tier architecture is a slow architecture to pass data through. The reason is each application server, it's a bottleneck where the data have to go through. On the other hand side, and here the people are right, the 3-tier architecture, it's a very safe, it's a very secure architecture. And with that, it may make sense to use that. And it happens the same thing then with every feature in Identity Manager and Identity Manager project. During the project planning phase, it is very important to make sure in which place of the installation a 3-tier architecture is necessary and in which installation it is not necessary. There may be projects where 3-tier architecture is the only architecture to use, but on the other side there may be a lot of other projects where only parts of the installation will use the 3-tier architecture and other parts will use the faster architecture we have had before. The good message here is we can install a mix as we need and like it. If we open our web installer that allows us to install the application server as well, and we step through the first form, we will figure out that there is very often seen a red dot that tells us there's an error. If we just hover over that specific error, and if we follow the text of that error message, we are able to see that the first field is empty, which is correct, but there's another error message that tells us that the SSL encryption option is just turned on, and there's no SSL encryption installed on that specific server. So this is a hint for us just to install SSL encryption. Don't worry about that very interesting place for that error message. In the future you will get your red dot in front of the SSL encryption option instead of the field application name. To get that prerequisite at the end fulfilled, we close our installer and as well the setup set and step to the Internet Information Server Manager. And in this Internet Information Server Manager, we activate now SSL encrypted communication, which at the end means that we can talk with our Identity Information Server with the help of the HTTPS protocol. Therefore, we need first a certificate, and to get one, I select my server and step to the configuration of server certificates. Here I hopefully can use a more official certificate that already exists in that environment, but for our specific purpose, I will move to create self-signed certificate and will create a self-signed certificate. First, I have to specify the name of the certificate. It's a friendly name, so web server SSL certificate could be a good idea. And as certificate store, I will not use the section of personal certificates. For that purpose, it is better to select the web hosting section. Now we have created our certificate, and the next thing to do is on the default website where we want to store our application server later on to configure the binding for SSL encrypted communication. With that, I select bindings, I jump into that form and add a new binding. I select from the type list HTTPS. And after that, I ensure that the correct certificate, the one I have created before, it's selected. You can see the new binding, and additionally to that, you can as well see that the port gets auto-configured. And the last thing to do is to figure out if that SSL encrypted communication is up and running, and therefore I use on the right side of my IIS manager the browse option for the HTTPS communication configured website. As you can see, a browser opens, and this browser shows the well-known message that makes me aware of that I'm stepping to a website with a self-signed certificate, which is a security issue, and I have now to confirm that I want to do that, knowing that this is a self-signed certificate. And after a small second message, here we are. That shows me the welcome page of my IIS server, and you can see in the line above, that means where the URL stands in there, that we are using an HTTPS communication. After we closed now our specific browser page, again, we can step to the configuration of our app server. Therefore, I start from the setup DVD, again our autorun exe. I jump into the section for installation, and there I search for the option to install Identity Manager components. And the only component that exists there, it's the web-based component setup set. And after a while, the form starts and I can see a small web installer wizard, and the web installer wizard now allows me to install a lot of different web applications. There's the standard web portal, there is the SPML web service, there is the option to uninstall the standard web portal, there is a SOAP web service, and at the end there is our application server we can install, and this is the option I want to choose here. First page is to select the database and to make clear with which database or system user I want to connect to the database. In a normal productive environment, I will use a specific user from my app servers. And in our scenario, I use my system user I use here nearly for everything, which is the Herwig system user. On the next screen now, I get the red dot again, and the red dot tells me this time only that I have to type in an application name. So I type in, for example, EIM app server. I let the enforce SSL turned on, which is pretty important because an app server have to be safe. The only reason to have an app server is security, and an app server without SSL encryption, it's a bloody wrong thing. Normally, I will as well use Windows authentication for the user who wants to sign in using the app server, but to ensure that everybody is able to get a logging mask in that environment so that he is able to sign in with different users, I switch from Windows authentication down to anonymous authentication, which is the test mode. If I like to work with Windows users, it is easy to do that with the help of this specific next option. But in our scenario, I use a connection string with the SQL user, and this is the default option. On the next screen, I get asked for a new certificate. This has nothing to do with the certificate I've used for our SSL encrypted communication. Here I need a certificate to work together with the app server, and because of that I cannot use an existing certificate because I have not created one in the past, so I select just from the drop down here to create a new certificate. As you can see, you get predefined a name for that specific certificate, and the only thing that makes sense to change might be the key size. But for our demo scenario, I just let the key size as it is and use the 2048 key. Next step is to install the complete app server. And after some seconds, the whole thing ends. The app server is already installed and I can start testing the app server. To get my app server tested, the first thing to do is to start my web browser. And please recognize that I'm back on the workstation now. The installation of the app server was just done on the server. Now we start our browser front end on the workstation, which is the standard environment we are working with. First, I want to show you the overview portal, and therefore I type in the URL of my web server, which is the name of the server followed by IAM application server. And you get a login page, and this login page is for administrators just to see the web server working. I can sign in with my system user. And my management front end opens and I can see the number of connected sessions. I can as well see interactive entities, units of work that are present, open or working here on the app server. This is stuff I will show you a little bit later because before I can see here anything, I have to connect one of my other tools using the app server directly to the database. To do this, I step to the manager. The manager, this time it's already connected, I will say directly to the database. You can see that here on the top. I will close now the manager connection and will reopen it this time using the app server. To get that working, I have first to select another database connection. Therefore, I click on Add a Database Connection. From the list, I select the application server. With Next, I get the next form, and there I have to copy and paste my application server URL into the URL field. To make it not more complex than necessary, and for my specific scenario here, I have to check the box Accept Self-Signed Certificates. For everything other else, I need an official certificate store. I use the same authenticator than before. It's the system user, and I type in again the same user we have used before, which is Hervik. And with the help of Connect, I can just sign in, and you see the front end starts working and loading the complete UI. This time you can see on the top that we are using now the app server, and the next thing I want to do is to generate a little bit of traffic so that we can see something in the management page as well. Best way to get a lot of traffic is to play around with person objects, because person objects are loading as well a lot of related stuff. So I load my first person object and switch back to my application server management page. And as you can see on the application server management page, the number of interactive entities, it's just increasing. Number of sessions is increased, especially because we have now the manager already open. Only the unit of work, it's doing nothing. This is because we have not opened one of these records to do something with. One last thing might be of interest. Therefore, I open the job queue info. The reason to do so is because job queue info, it's one of these tools that cannot be used with the app server. That means if I step to add a new database connection, you will see SQL Server and Oracle like before, but what you not can see here is the option App Server. That should tell you that it is not possible to use the job queue info with the help of the app server. Maybe that will be possible in the future, but right for now, not every front end is connectable to the app server. We have first only used front ends. They could be used from other people than from project developers. At the end, if an app server is possible, you will see that in the database connection dialog, and if it's not possible, then you will find no entry like you can see it here. And with this, my testing ends, and we can walk to the next feature we want to discuss.